Well, my body lies over the ocean. My body lies over the sea. Ooh, my body lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my body to me.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Scott Arizala Show, presented by CampHawker.tv. My name is Travis Allison, and allow me please to introduce my friend, Scott Arizala. How's it going, Scott?
Great, thank you so much, Travis. I appreciate you being here and hosting the show with me. Today we wanted to follow up on a couple of other staff training episodes that we've done, one or two in the first season, and I think one or so, or maybe two other ones in this season. I wanted to talk really specifically about role plays and scenarios. I think it's a staff training technique that a lot of us use that some of us misuse, and some of us maybe don't use enough because I think there's some real benefit to doing this kind of stuff. So I wanted to take a few minutes and talk a little bit about role play scenarios and whatnot. And I'll start by telling you folks we've about an interesting thing that we've been doing at one of the camps that I run called Dragonfly. Over the past few years, I have to give credit to my co-director and partner in crime. Her name is Sylvia Van Meerten. She developed this idea. We as many of you know at Dragonfly, we work with lots of different kinds of kids. One of our sessions is for kids with autism, and she developed this particular activity really for use to help train on some skills with kids with autism. I will tell you that we have since sort of blown this up to be more generalized to all of our kids at Dragonfly, but at any rate, we call it the Meltdown Carnival. And here's what it is. It's basically what it sounds like, in that it's role plays where the actors are having meltdowns. And sometimes they're autism-related meltdowns, and again, since we've evolved and we now have different kinds of just interesting / negative behavior that are happening at each one of these stations. But we call it the Meltdown Carnival because we set it up like a carnival, where there's stations and you're in a group and you go from station to station and enjoying each one of the activities. And each activity is a meltdown. Now, what's different about the role play and how we use the role play and these scenarios in kind of a unique way is we have some of our more veteran staff be the kids in these scenarios, and we have them role-playing from kind of the minute the activity starts all the way through to the end, so they never break character. All right, and so you as a group, you sort of happen upon this next this next station in the carnival where all of a sudden something is going on with a kid. And it can be anything from a kid, totally freaking out, not wanting to get out of the pool. If we're talking about, an autism meltdown, maybe they're banging their head against something, screaming, whatever. If we're talking about just sort of more generalized negative behavior, it could be a fight breaking out between two kids, whatever it is. And you just as a group sort of happen upon it. And then the rules that we give our groups is that one or two staff out of each group is going to go try and deal with it. And they're allowed to sort of tag out, but the action is never going to stop. And we give the actors a handful of solutions that will kind of work to calm them down or get them in a better space to talk about what just happened, whatever. But until the staff member engages that kind of solution, the actors are sort of told not to relent, not to sort of give in. And what's different about this experience is, and every year, bar none, this is like the thing that people say was the best experience they had during training, because of the way we tell the actors to not stop acting as the counselors approach, as the group is leaving, the scenario is still going on. There's sort of a heightened level of stress, and don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you to like stress out your staff during training, but there's a sort of heightened level of realness, I guess, of reality that is built into it that everybody says is really helpful because you're in this scenario from the beginning, and even when you're like, okay, I gotta tag out, none of this is working, and you're sort of back huddled with your group going, okay, I tried this, it didn't work, the kid is still screaming in the background, right? And so there's this level of reality that I think that you don't get in maybe a normal role play that we absolutely love. And it was just an example of how I think we can start getting really creative with role plays and scenarios so that they're really powerful and meaningful for staff.
And I like that, Scott, because it's the lifeguarding lesson, right? If you can demonstrate this problem or this crisis, then you have a real empathy for how this crisis works. And I was never a lifeguard, but I was a wilderness first responder, and so I would take these 10-day courses every 2 years, and that was a huge part of it was playing the role in the scenario. And I remember an instructor coming up to me and saying, "Why aren't you healed? Why is it not going on?" I was like, "This guy's a jerk. Like, there's no way that this would work." And he's doing some of the stuff fine, but really it's just not, he doesn't have the whole picture. And, it helps to get people into the mindset in both ways, to give them that heightened sense of awareness, but also I'm sure it's very helpful for those who are actually in this scenario. But this brings up the idea, Scott, that these are the sort of things that we should practice ahead of time.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think using the skills that we try to teach in training is, your best. It's the best teaching. It's the best learning, right? Everybody watching out there probably has muttered these words at one point. But if I ask the question, when does staff training end? Right? It's clearly a trick question because, you'll want to say, well, at the end of staff week, right? Right before our first session. Then obviously the answer is it never ends. We're constantly learning all summer long. In fact, a lot of camps have gone to in-service trainings and things all summer long. Why? Because we recognize that training never ends. So to be able to build in practice time before kids come is just going to sort of sharpen these tools, sort of heighten this awareness. Just like you said, right? It's going to allow you to develop a bigger picture around why these skills are important and why these ideas are important. More so than just, it's because the director said they were important, or it's because some speaker said that this is a good thing to do. It's practical everyday life. And again, most youth development professionals, most camp professionals out there have been in scenarios or situations where they've taught a bunch of stuff to their staff, and then a week later they're looking and being like, why aren't you doing any of the things that we talked about? It's like we're defaulting into this weird mode of things that don't work or whatever. And it's frustrating, but I think one of the things that we can do to maybe help that is to sort of elevate these practicing skills. It's so important to practice.
All right. And do you have some ideas of things that we can do to role play, or things that we should go through with our staff?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. There's a couple things that actually, again, Sylvia, my co-director, and I do that I'd love for you all to steal and just make it your own. Tell your assistant director or your co-director that you came up with this idea on your own. One of the things that Sylvia and I started to do a few years ago that we find very interesting, and now at this point some of our returning staff look forward to when we're going to do this, is that she'll be leading a session or I'll be leading a session, and somewhere, and it's I don't know when if I'm leading it, I don't know when she's going to do it. I don't even know which session she's going to do it in, and vice versa. But at some point during a session, she'll either stand up or sort of abruptly stop me and disagree with me in sort of a kind of a rude, harsh way in front of everybody. And I'll we'll start this kind of argument right in front of everybody where I'll kind of I'll be a little bit insulted by how she just did that, and I'll say that to her, and I'll kind of adamantly disagree, and we'll kind of go back and forth for, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, just long enough for everybody and the 80 staff members in the room to get real uncomfortable with what's going on, because Sylvia and I we're the co-directors, right? So people are like, whoa, what's going on, right? And one of the things that we use that to talk about, and we'll use that throughout the week to talk about, is how disagreements and all that kind of stuff affect kids. So if you have a disagreement with your staff, with your co-counselor, how does that affect kids? And we'll stop it cold right there and be like, so how's everybody feeling? And inevitably people will be like, whoa, super awkward or whatever. And and we're always like, exactly. And you're adults, we're adults. Now imagine if you were all 12 and your two co-counselors are having this kind of argument in front of you. What does that feel like? It's just one way that we can get at one specific piece that we kind of harp on in our training, just in a different way, a little bit more, role play-ish, a little bit more experiential. I think that's one of my favorite ones to do. And if you get creative with that idea, that you can apply that to a lot of different things that we're teaching, and it's just sort of, on the spot. Another technique that we use at my camp that's related to that kind of feeling is, we call them drama bombs. We sort of plant drama bombs all training long, right? And basically what we do is we get different cohorts to together and to do things like have an argument at the lunch table, in front of everybody else, or in a small group debrief where we're talking about homesickness or something, like adamantly disagree with somebody else. Bring up to your unit leader, like get your another counselor in your unit. Decide on an issue that you guys are having. Obviously, this is fake, but decide on an issue that you're having. And approach the unit leader and be like, I hate her, I can't stand her, this is what's going on. And just like in real time, this isn't in front of everybody, this isn't your traditional role play, right? This is only happening to a small group of people. Sometimes it's only happening to one person, right? Like the unit leader is on the spot going, what do you mean you hate her? It's only day 3, how do we deal with this? And da-da-da. And what we're doing is we're sort of trying to build in, again, it's just this idea of practicing along the way.
And do you always do it in a large group, Scott, or do you break it down into smaller groups sometimes?
Well, we do a lot of small group work. And so one of the things that we do, and a lot of times people don't like role plays and scenarios because of the time aspect, right? And they say, well, we're working on this idea of counseling skills, and we have a bunch of these scenarios. We're going to break everybody down in small groups and give everybody one scenario, and then they have to get up and act it out in front of everybody, and that could take 3 hours. Absolutely. So we don't always do that. There are some times that we do that, and I'll talk about a technique. If you're going to do it that way, I'll talk about a technique that you can use. But oftentimes what we're doing is we're role playing or acting things out in small groups. Whether it's like what I just described, and it's totally outside the framework of a traditional workshop or session, and it's just like in the evening, and your unit leader is being told that these two aren't getting along or whatever. Or it's within the framework of that session. But sometimes what we're doing is we're having groups of, let's say, 4 or 5. Then we're having 2 of them act out in front of everybody else what the scenario or idea is.
Any other ideas that you've used in the past for role playing?
Yeah, I think the last one, and I really like it, and again, you got to play around with your time. If you have the time to do something like this is great. One of the things that I've done in the past with role plays is when we are doing that whole get up in front of everybody and act it out, one of the things that I like to have people do is do a good version and a bad version. It doesn't really matter what, do the good first, the bad second, or the bad first, it doesn't matter. But the idea is what you're planting with because typically what you do is you do the role play and then you have some sort of large group discussion about it. You kind of debrief what you saw, like what worked well, what didn't, so on and so forth. The hard part, I think, for young people is when you're seeing it being acted out. I think the hard part is to say, well, yeah, that's of course exactly what I would do. They did it right. Because if you're giving somebody a scenario, they're not going to sit there and go, well, let's do a subpar job at this, in front of everybody, right? And so most of the time the comments are like, I really like what Kristen did, that's exactly what I would do. But if you have them role play a good version and a bad version, not only is it funnier, but then you have this area, the sort of area to talk about, the in-between, what happened that wasn't so good and what happened that was really good, and how would you maybe slip into the bad, not meaning to, and how can you sort of work more towards the good on a constant basis, right? I think it provides for a richer discussion when you do some work like that of showing people what it looks like not so great and what it looks like in a better way.
Right, and you bring in humor, which makes things easier to remember. And that good versus bad reminds me every time of good idea, bad idea from the Animaniacs. And we used that theme often in our training as well. So, are there any resources that you could share, Scott, that would help people develop these scenarios or get to good role play that works for your training?
Absolutely. There's a book that I got a year or 2 ago called How Long Until Visiting Day by a guy named J.J. Hinckley, who is a camp director, one of the directors at Camp Scatico up in New York. I think, and it's on Amazon. It's called How Long Until Visiting Day. It's a great book, and it's the whole book is about role plays. So he talks a little bit about how to use them, and then he has literally hundreds of role plays. And of course, they're specific to his camp, so you got to kind of change some of the words and whatever. But we use a lot of the role plays out of there. So that's a great resource. Another great resource is your staff. believe it or not. So there's two things that I do, both when I'm training other people's staff as well as when I am working with my own staff, that I think you can do. One is I take a lot of polls. And they're mostly informal. I'll do it during a session, I'll do it during meals and other kinds of downtime, where I'm just asking, like, what are the 3 most important things we can learn right now? Or I'll give them a bunch of choices and say, of these 10 things, what are the 2 things that you want to talk about the most? And we'll just take some polls right there. And that way we're kind of getting at, not individually, not what everybody needs individually, but as a group, we're getting at more kind of what they want to hear when it comes to homesickness or whatever, versus what I think is important to talk about homesickness. So doing a lot of polling, I think, helps to develop what you're going to use role plays with, and scenarios, and what you're not. And then finally, again, this is something I do with a lot of camps, basically every camp that I work with. And I've actually started to do it now with professionals as well, and it's fascinating to do it with professionals. But at the beginning of a session, I just hand out a bunch of index cards, and I say, at some point, you're going to have a question, and it's not going to necessarily be a time that you can raise your hand and ask the question, or it's going to be the kind of question that means kind of a longer answer. So write down your question, whether it's about this topic or anything else, and then, at the end, I kind of have everyone turn it in, and most times I have some opportunity to handle some of those questions, whether that's like the end of a training day, maybe over a meal, maybe there's some downtime built into the day. If it's my own staff, we can kind of like review those questions or those index cards over the course of the day. Maybe that changes some of the content or some of the way we approach the next day. But it's fascinating to get these questions because they're totally anonymous. So people just kind of write it down and hand it in, right? And they ask just about anything when it's anonymous. But what's most fascinating for me is 9 times out of 10, you can group them into categories. And you can say, wow, you know what? A lot of our staff are really asking about disclosures around child abuse. Like that's really unclear, it seems like, because we've gotten a lot of questions just about how to handle the disclosure. We need to sort of rehab that discussion. And then, of course, there's so much subtext in how people ask questions. I was at a camp a few years ago, I won't name names, but I was at a camp a few years ago, and every question that I got, most questions that I got on these index cards had this weird subtext underneath it. The questions were things like, how come all the kids don't like my activity? Or how come all the kids never want to listen to me when I'm giving them directions? Or how come all the kids are always disruptive when we're going from point A to point B? And it was just fascinating to me because if you think about some of those questions, there's some really, I'm not going to get into it, but there's some really interesting subtext, what's going on with the culture at that camp that these are the kinds of questions people are asking. Just interesting to note, interesting to talk about with the camp director, interesting to say, does that change how we're going to approach some content or whatever?
Well, thanks, Scott, for filling us in on some really cool ideas for role-playing in scenarios. For those of you watching, we want to say thank you so much. We appreciate your time. If you liked Scott's idea of planting drama bombs, and give us a thumbs up on the video. And if you're watching for the first time, we invite you to subscribe to the video so you'll get notified when the next videos in our Season 2 of the Scott Arizala Show come on live to YouTube. My name is Travis Allison from camphacker.tv, and thank you very much, Scott, for a great show.
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. And my name is Scott Arizala. If you want to find out more about what I do, you can check out my website at thecampcounselor.com. You can also check out my new subscription service. It's a staff training resource called the Camp Counselor Insider, where you can also get MP3s of our first season of the Scott Arizala Show. And that's at thecampcounselor.com/insider. So thank you all for tuning in and watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next summer.
Well, my body